The twin suns of Duro burned high above the frontier outpost of Kariva Station, casting long, wavering shadows across the makeshift structures that huddled together like survivors clinging to the edge of the galaxy. The settlement had been cobbled together from salvaged transport hulls, modular prefabs, and repurposed mining equipment, all painted in the bleached hues of desert dust. It was hot, unbearably so, and even inside an environmental suit, 7-year-old Cassian Ryan could feel the sweat pooling at the base of his spine. His helmet visor was streaked with dust and old fingerprints, but his bright gray eyes scanned everything with relentless curiosity. "Dad, slow down," he called, his voice warbling through the speakers in his helmet. "I can't keep up." Lieutenant Colonel Bram Ryan turned around, his lean face softening behind the tinted glass of his own helmet. "Stay close, Cass," he replied, pausing long enough for the boy to catch up. "Kariva's not a playground." Cassian huffed but nodded. He was used to moving around. After his mother passed away 2 years ago, Bram had taken his son with him on every new deployment. Now, stationed as a liaison for a delicate mining agreement on the newly charted planet of Viridios, Bram was doing his best to juggle diplomacy and fatherhood. As they turned the corner into the settlement's central bazaar, a bustling hub of traders, mercenaries, and travelers, Cassian stared in awe. There were creatures here he had only seen in storybooks, a trio of feathered Relians debating over spice prices, a 6-limbed Krellin twirling crystals for a captivated crowd, and towering plant-like beings moving with glacial grace. "Whoa!" he murmured. But then, distracted by the dazzling movement, Cassian didn't see where he was going and collided headfirst into someone much taller, toppling backward into the dust with a startled grunt. Cassian blinked up from the ground, dazed, until a face leaned over him. His breath caught. The girl standing before him was not human. That much was obvious. Her skin shimmered in hues of deep bronze and gold, like sunlight reflected on old copper. Her hair, long and tangled with beads and feathers, was the color of burned chestnut, and her eyes, brilliant, almond-shaped, and unblinking, were the most vivid green Cassian had ever seen. Emeralds with fire in them. "You walk like a blind crustworm," she said, her voice light but edged with amusement. "You should look where you're going, small one." Cassian scrambled to his feet, brushing sand off his suit. "Sorry! I didn't see, I didn't know." She tilted her head, watching him fumble. Then she laughed. It was a strange sound, musical and short, like bells struck underwater. "I'm not angry," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "I've never met a human child before. I'm Cassian," he blurted, then added awkwardly. "My dad says I should always introduce myself properly." She smiled at that, a small curve of her lips. "I am Leora, daughter of Kael'thari, warden of the Northern Stones." Cassian hesitated, then extended a gloved hand. Leora looked at it curiously before accepting it, their hands meeting in an awkward brief clasp. "Are you a warrior?" he asked, eyes wide as he studied the sleek dark armor that adorned her small frame. She couldn't be more than 11, maybe 12, but she carried herself like someone older, with that fluid grace Cassian had seen in martial vids. "In training," she said, chin lifted proudly. "I'll undergo my trial in 2 cycles. "That's so cool," he breathed. "Can you teach me to move like you?" "It would take years," she replied, smirking. "Maybe even longer for a human." Cassian beamed. "I don't mind. I'll come back when I'm older. I promise." She blinked. "You promise?" "Yeah. And when I'm grown up," he said with all the certainty of youth, "I'm going to marry you." Leora stared at him for a long second, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed again, and this time it wasn't amused or mocking. It was surprised. Soft. "You're a strange one, Cassian Ryan," she said, shaking her head as if trying to decipher him. "You don't even know what that promise means." "I do too," he insisted, puffing up his chest. "It means I'll come back for you. And we'll be together. I'll protect you and fight by your side. Like a knight." Leora tilted her head again, those brilliant green eyes narrowing slightly in thought. In her culture, promises weren't thrown around lightly. A vow, even from a child, was taken seriously. "Then you need to give something to seal it," she said. "That is our way." Cassian fumbled with the zipper on his suit until he pulled out a small plastic figure, a model of an old Earth starfighter. Its wings were chipped and the paint was worn, but he held it out with reverence. "This was my favorite. I want you to have it." She accepted it with solemnity, turning the tiny ship in her hand. "It will do," she said. "Wait here." Before he could ask where she was going, Leora darted off, vanishing into the crowd like smoke. Cassian waited, nervous energy bouncing in his legs. When she returned, she held out a slender woven braid of dark fiber, threaded with tiny beads of metal and stone. "This is a Kareth cord," she explained, tying it gently around his wrist. "It marks a promise made under sky and sun. You will not take it off until the vow is fulfilled." Cassian nodded seriously, even as the cord itched beneath the sleeve of his suit. "I won't. I swear." Behind them, Bram Ryan's voice called out, sharper than before. "Cass! Time to go!" Leora's smile faded, her gaze dipping for the first time. "You're leaving?" "Just for now," Cassian said quickly. "But I'll be back. I'll find you again. I promised." Leora gave a small, solemn nod. "Then I'll remember. And I'll wait." As Bram led his son away, Cassian turned to wave one last time, his tiny frame dwarfed by the sprawl of the alien city. Leora stood alone amid the sea of beings, the plastic starfighter clutched to her chest. 3 days later, the Rhine residence was a flurry of packing crates, flashing alerts, and half-spoken arguments over encrypted comms. Bram moved like a soldier preparing for war, controlled, efficient, but with a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Dad, I don't want to go," Cassian said for the 3rd time that morning, gripping the edge of a crate that had swallowed most of his toys. Bram crouched beside him, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Cass, things are changing here. The mining operation uncovered something sacred to the Viridians, and now the talks are unraveling. The local clans are on edge. It's not safe anymore. But we just got here. What about Leora?" His voice cracked slightly, his bottom lip trembling. "I promised her." Bram's face softened, his soldier's resolve cracking just enough to show the father beneath. "I know you did. But promises don't always mean staying in one place. Sometimes keeping a promise means knowing when to leave." Cassian shook his head stubbornly. "I want to say goodbye." There was a beat of silence, then Bram nodded. "There's a reception tonight. The Viridians will be there. If she's allowed to attend, you'll have your chance. But you stay by my side the entire time. Got it?" Cassian nodded quickly, wiping his eyes. That evening, the great pavilion of Viridios shimmered with bioluminescent drapery and music that pulsed like a heartbeat. Viridian nobles, their skin hues ranging from bronze to deep crimson, moved with elegance and wariness among the human delegation. Tension still hung thick in the air. Cassian stood beside his father, dressed in a stiff jacket and struggling not to fidget. Then he saw her. Leora stood across the chamber beside a tall, commanding figure, her father, no doubt. She was different now, wrapped in formal armor, her hair braided with delicate stones that caught the shifting light. But her eyes, those emerald stars, locked onto his from across the crowd. Without hesitation, she stepped away from her father and crossed the floor toward him. "You came," she said softly. "I said I would," Cassian replied, grinning. "I keep my promises." The hum of conversation around them faded as Leora stopped a few feet away from Cassian. Her eyes flicked to the cord still wrapped around his wrist, frayed now, a little faded, but intact. "You kept it," she murmured, her voice unreadable. "Of course I did," he said with quiet pride. "You said I shouldn't take it off until I came back." Leora's gaze lingered on him for a long moment, then softened. "Most would have forgotten. Or said they never meant it. I meant it." From the corner of his eye, Cassian saw Bram approaching. "Time's almost up, son. Shuttles leave at dawn." Cassian looked back at Leora. I have to go, he whispered. But I'll come back. When I'm older. Stronger. She nodded once, solemn. I will wait. Then, to his surprise, she reached for the small braid at the end of her own armor's collar and untied it. Her fingers brushed his as she tucked it into his palm. A token, she said. To keep your memory sharp. I won't forget, he promised again. Bram stepped beside them, his expression tight as he addressed Leora. Thank you for speaking with him. Your father's been very gracious. Leora inclined her head in a manner that seemed far older than her years. He respects yours. Even if our people struggle to understand one another. As they turned to go, Leora called out softly. Cassian? He glanced back. When you return, don't come as a boy. Come as a warrior. Cassian nodded. The weight of her words settled into his chest like an anchor. A goal. A vow. The next morning, the sky was still dark when their shuttle lifted off from Viridio's, casting long shadows across the canyon settlement below. Cassian watched through the viewport until the world was nothing but a glowing crescent in the black. In his hand, he clutched the braided token she'd given him. No matter how far he traveled, one thing was certain. He would return. Years passed. Cassian Rhine grew up under the steel skies of Ganymede Station, Earth's outermost military outpost. It was a far cry from the sunlit deserts of Viridio's. Here, the air always tasted like metal, and the walls hummed with artificial life. At 15, he joined the Helios Academy, a training ground for Earth's interstellar defense recruits. Most thought he was too young, too soft. But Cassian had a fire in his chest that no one could explain. They didn't know what he carried. The cord still bound around his wrist, though now tucked beneath his uniform. The little braid from Leora, now kept in a clear case on his bunk. A silent reminder. A promise not yet fulfilled. Rieni! Barked Instructor Halden one morning as Cassian picked himself up off the sparring mat, blood trickling from his lip. You get knocked down every week. You ever gonna learn how to fight like a soldier? Cassian wiped his mouth, then stood tall. I'm not here to fight like a soldier, sir. I'm here to fight like a warrior. Halden narrowed his eyes. And what exactly do you think the difference is? A soldier follows orders, Cassian said calmly. A warrior lives by a code. The room fell silent. Halden stared at him for a beat, then gave a slow nod. That may be the most intelligent thing I've heard all week. Now get up. Again. Cassian's technique was unorthodox, fluid and elusive. He moved in spirals, redirecting attacks instead of meeting them head-on. It was unlike anything the instructors had seen before. What is that style? One of the cadets whispered to another. No idea, the other replied. But it works. Cassian didn't share the truth, that he'd spent every spare hour studying Viridian combat holos. Downloaded from obscure archives. Looped until the movements became second nature. He trained not just his body, but his mind, learning the cadence of Leora's people, their speech, their rituals, their history. He wasn't just preparing for war. He was preparing for her. At 22, Cassian Ryan stood before the Tactical High Council in full dress uniform, his posture ramrod straight, his eyes calm but intense. His reputation had grown swiftly over the years. Top scores in combat simulation, fluency in 4 alien dialects, and an unbroken record of successful missions. But today, something different hung in the air. Counselor Nera, a sharp-eyed strategist from the Saturn Enclave, tapped her stylus against the table. Your record is impressive, Lieutenant. But what we want to know is why. Cassian didn't flinch. Why what, ma'am? Why you've submitted 10 transfer requests, all related to Viridio's or the Viridian territories. What's your interest? He hesitated only a breath. Viridio's is politically volatile. A potential linchpin in the balance of power along the mid-spine trade routes. If war comes, they'll be the first target. Nera arched an eyebrow. That's a very diplomatic answer. It's also the truth, Cassian replied. But if you want the rest of it, I gave my word once. And I intend to keep it. There was a long silence. Then Admiral Varen leaned forward. The Viridian Protectorate has declined multiple diplomatic envoys from the Galactic Assembly. Their new leader is rumored to be highly distrustful of humans. Cassian's heart skipped. Name? The Admiral glanced at his tablet. Warden Leora of the Northern Stones. Daughter of Kael'thari. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. She hadn't just become a warrior. She had become a warden. The Admiral continued. The Assembly is planning one final attempt. A peace mission with strategic support. We want someone who understands their culture, who might earn their trust. Cassian stepped forward. Send me. You be going not just as a soldier, but as Earth's representative. Nera warned. That means politics. Diplomacy. Exposure. I understand. His voice never wavered. If there's a chance to prevent war, and fulfill a promise, I'll take it. The Admiral's eyes flicked across the others before nodding once. You leave within the week. As Cassian turned to leave, a familiar weight settled against his chest, the small case around his neck, containing the Kareth cord and Leora's token. He was going back. The stars shimmered outside the observation window as the diplomatic vessel Aegis Dawn broke through Viridios's upper atmosphere. Cassian stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the world he hadn't seen in 15 years come into view. Desert ridges curled like scarred knuckles across the planet's surface, golden in the twin sunlight. The canyons glowed faintly, alive with the bioluminescent minerals that had once made this planet a miner's dream, and a diplomat's nightmare. The crew was quiet, the mood tense. Beside Cassian stood Ambassador Celine Marlowe, a seasoned envoy with a reputation for calming even the most volatile planetary leaders. She gave him a sidelong glance. You've been here before. Yes, ma'am. You know the terrain? The customs? I do. Celine studied him for a moment longer. You're unusually composed for someone about to meet the leader of a planet hostile to our presence. Cassian let the corner of his mouth lift. It's not hostility. It's protection. They remember what we did the last time. Do you remember someone? She asked, her voice gentler. Cassian turned back to the window. Yes. When the ship touched down near the Viridian capital, the airlock hissed open and a delegation awaited them. At the front stood a tall figure clad in sleek ceremonial armor etched with curling silver patterns. Her hair, now darker, was tied back in long braids interwoven with threads of copper. She wore a circlet, not a crown, but close. But it was the eyes that stopped Cassian cold. Still the same searing emerald green, still able to freeze him in place with one glance. Warden Leora. She stepped forward impassive. Welcome to Viridios. Celine began the formal introductions, but Cassian barely heard them. Leora's gaze swept over him, indifferent, until he reached into his jacket and pulled something out. The Kareth cord, frayed but intact. And beside it, the woven token she'd given him long ago. I made a promise, he said simply, holding them up. Her expression cracked, just slightly. You, she whispered. Recognition bloomed in her eyes, slow and dawning like sunrise over the dunes. The ceremonial courtyard was silent for a moment, the wind stirring fine dust into swirling eddies around the gathered delegates. Even the Viridian guards, ever poised and still, tilted their heads slightly toward the two figures now standing face to face after 15 long years. You returned, Leora said, her voice low, unreadable. She took a slow step forward, her emerald gaze locked on the token in his hand. After all this time. Cassian nodded once. I told you I would. The air between them seemed to ripple, filled with more weight than either of them had expected. Cassian felt it, the swell of emotion beneath her practiced stillness, though she did well to hide it. She had grown into a warden, yes, but she was still Leora. You've changed, she said, her gaze traveling over his face, the uniform, the way he held himself like someone who'd seen fire and chosen to walk through it anyway. So have you, he replied. Ambassador Marlowe stepped forward gently, breaking the moment. Warden Leora, we come on behalf of Earth and the Galactic Assembly. We wish to reopen the channels of peace. Leora's expression hardened slightly, her eyes flicking toward the ambassador. Channels that were closed when your corporations desecrated our sacred places. We're not them, Cassian interjected quietly. Her gaze returned to him. I'm not here as a soldier. Not even as a diplomat, he said. I'm here because of a vow. And I'll do whatever it takes to earn your people's trust. Leora stared at him a moment longer. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and motioned for her guards to follow. We will hear your proposal, she said over her shoulder. But do not mistake our patience for acceptance. Cassian started to follow, but one of the guards stepped into his path. She remembers you, the guard said in a low voice. That's the only reason you're still breathing. Cassian nodded once. Then I'll make sure she doesn't regret it. The Viridian capital was carved into the cliffs themselves, a labyrinth of vaulted chambers, sunken courtyards, and bridges suspended between craggy spires. The stone shimmered with the same quiet light Cassian remembered from childhood, only now the architecture loomed larger, more refined. The world had aged, just as he had. They were led to a vast chamber beneath the central plateau, where ancient murals covered every wall, depicting the rise of the Viridian clans, their sacred bonds with the land, and the battles fought to preserve them. At the head of a curved obsidian table, Leora sat, her armor replaced with a flowing garment of deep earth tones, marked by a single gleaming clasp at her shoulder, the sigil of the Northern Stones. Cassian stood beside Ambassador Marlowe as the discussions began. Our intelligence suggests the Kahari Confederacy is preparing a full-scale advance toward Viridios, Marlowe said, her tone measured. If left unchecked, the Confederacy will strip this planet bare. Leora did not blink. And you come bearing swords and peace. We offer alliance, Marlowe clarified. Mutual defense. Trade. Access to our outer system sensor grid. Leora's eyes flicked to Cassian. And what does the boy who made promises have to say? Cassian stepped forward slowly. You know what they're capable of. You've seen what happens to worlds that stand alone. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. And your presence here is merely coincidence? No, he said plainly. I asked to come? Why? Cassian met her gaze. Because I told you I'd return. Not as a child, but as someone who could stand beside you. And because I believe in the bond we made, even if it was long ago. Leora studied him. Behind her stoicism was something turbulent, shifting beneath the surface. Then she stood. You will walk with me, she said, directing the command at Cassian. Alone. Ambassador Marlowe hesitated, but Cassian nodded. They passed through a narrow corridor, lit only by embedded crystals in the walls. Finally, Leora stopped in a chamber high above the city. A shrine. The air was thick with incense and memory. This is where I brought your toy, she said softly. Cassian blinked. My starfighter? She nodded. I kept it here. As proof that once, a human child gave something freely without expectation or deception. Why tell me now? She turned to face him fully. Because I need to know if that child still exists beneath the uniform. Cassian reached into his shirt, drawing out the small case. He opened it, and placed the aged Kareth cord into her hand. He never left, he said. Leora stared down at the cord, her fingers tracing the frayed edges with surprising delicacy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was heavy with unspoken questions, words they didn't know how to say aloud. I thought about throwing it away once, she finally said, her voice barely louder than the incense crackling in the corner brazier. After the 5th year, when I realized you might never come back. Cassian stepped closer, quiet. What stopped you? She looked up at him, eyes catching the soft crystal light. Because every time I looked at it, I remembered the boy who didn't flinch when he made a vow. The boy who looked me in the eye and believed his word meant something. He swallowed. It still does. A breath escaped her lips. Not a sigh, not quite. More like a release of tension she hadn't known she was holding. Leora turned, facing the overlook behind the shrine. The city stretched out beneath them, rooftops of mineral glass, winding walkways, and the gleam of watchtowers carved into stone. The horizon flickered faintly with aurora light, a natural phenomenon Viridios was famous for. "I was angry when I saw you step off that ship," she admitted. "Because part of me hoped you wouldn't return. That I could keep the memory of the promise intact, untouched by the world we both lived in." Cassian stood beside her, quiet. "But then you did return," she continued. "Not as a storybook warrior, not as some perfect savior, but as you. The same eyes. The same truth." He met her gaze. "So, what happens now?" Leora's hand tightened on the cord. "I lead my people. You fight for yours. And somewhere in between, we decide what to do with the promise neither of us broke." Cassian nodded, something warm blooming in his chest. "Then let's start with defending your home," he said. Leora turned, a rare, small smile curling her lips. "Very well, Cassian Rhine. Let's begin with the war." Cassian strode back into the main chamber beside Leora, her steps measured and commanding as the delegates rose to attention. The room pulsed with new energy. Whatever had passed between them in the shrine had shifted something unseen, and the Viridian Council sensed it. Ambassador Marlowe raised an eyebrow as Cassian resumed his place beside her. "Well?" she asked quietly. "She'll listen," Cassian murmured. "But she won't kneel. And neither should we." Leora took her seat at the head of the curved obsidian table. Her voice was calm, but laced with steel. "We will allow the Earth delegation limited access to our forward intelligence, and provide a joint operation channel for tactical response." Marlowe nodded. "A promising start. But we do this under Viridian command," Leora added, her eyes sweeping across the room. "No oversight. No hidden agendas. And no false promises." Cassian met her gaze and gave a slight nod of affirmation. A murmuring began among the Viridian counselors, some skeptical, others cautiously hopeful. It had been centuries since their people had shared command with outsiders. "Warden," said Elder Delos, one of the older council members, "you place much trust in this human." Leora didn't look away. "I place trust in a bond made before either of us held titles. One that has proven more enduring than treaties inked in ink or blood." Cassian felt those words settle deep inside him. Marlowe cleared her throat. "Earth will match your commitment. Our fleet is already positioned beyond the moon. With combined defenses, we can repel the Confederacy should they strike." "They will," Leora said, standing. "And sooner than you expect. Our scouts report Confederacy vessels gathering beyond the shattered belt. Their flagship has already crossed into restricted space." "How long until they reach orbit?" Cassian asked. "For cycles, maybe less." Leora turned to him. "We'll need to coordinate an immediate defense plan. I want you in the war room. Tonight." Cassian's heart pounded. "I'll be there." As the chamber emptied, Leora approached him one last time. Her voice was low, for his ears alone. "If you fight beside me, you fight as one of us. Not a diplomat. Not a guest. A warrior." He nodded slowly, eyes steady. "Then teach me what I need to know." Her fingers grazed his wrist where the Kareth cord once lay. "You already know." The Viridian war room was carved into the bedrock beneath the capital, an oval chamber ringed with floating hollow displays and lined with ancient glyphs etched in luminescent ink. At its center, a large projection of Viridios rotated slowly, symbols marking cities, terrain points, and projected invasion routes. Cassian stood with Leora and her top strategists, his eyes scanning the movements of the Confederacy's fleet. Red markers now crept inward from the outer bands of the system, shifting incrementally closer every hour. 3 heavy cruisers, 7 assault frigates, and 1 dreadnought, said Commander Rowe, a scarred Viridian with a voice like gravel. "Their dreadnought alone could crack our outer defenses. They'll strike in a feint," Cassian said, gesturing toward the southwest quadrant. "They want to draw your ground forces there while the dreadnought drops troops directly into the capital." Rowe grunted, clearly skeptical. And how would a human know how Confederacy generals think? Because they tried it on Gale Dan 6. Cashin replied, cool and steady. I was there. We barely stopped them in time. They'll assume you haven't seen that tactic. They rely on repetition to test weaknesses. Leora said nothing for a long moment, then nodded once. I agree. We shift defenses from the southwest to cover the Temple Ridge. If they bypass it, the capital is open. You'll leave the southwest exposed. Ro argued. No, Leora said, looking at Cashin. He'll lead a decoy team there. Make it look like we took the bait. Cashin's eyes widened slightly. You want me to draw them in? She stepped closer, her voice lowering. You said you'd stand beside me. This is your chance. He didn't hesitate. Then I'll need 6 warriors. Fast, silent, and willing to make noise when the time comes. You'll have them, Leora said. And I'll lead the counter-strike personally. Cashin frowned. Shouldn't you remain in the capital? Leora's eyes flashed. I don't rule from behind walls, Cashin. I was raised to protect my people with my own hands. He couldn't help but smile. Some things haven't changed. She tilted her head. And some have. They stood in silence for a moment, the map's glow painting shadows across their faces. Get some rest, she said finally. Tomorrow, the stars may fall. Cashin nodded, but as he left the chamber, he felt something bloom quietly between his ribs, a connection reigniting, not just from memory, but from purpose. They weren't just keeping a promise anymore. They were fighting for the future it created. The desert wind howled outside the transport as it skimmed low across the dunes, barely visible against the night sky. No navigation lights. No traceable signals. Cashin sat in the hold with 6 Viridian warriors, their armor darkened for stealth, their faces stoic. Among them was Syrah, Leora's cousin and one of the few Viridians who trusted Cashin from the start. She checked her curved blades and adjusted the strap across her chest, giving Cashin a sidelong glance. You move like one of us, she said in a clipped tone. But you speak like a human. I am one, Cashin replied without offense. But I've spent most of my life preparing to walk your path. Because of her, Syrah said. He nodded once. Because of a promise I made. And because I believe in this place. Syrah's gaze lingered on him for a moment, then she grunted. We'll see if your belief holds when the sand turns red. Outside, the horizon shifted, mountains giving way to jagged cliffs where ancient statues of stone watched from the shadows. The decoy location had once been a ceremonial site, long abandoned, but it still carried spiritual weight among the Viridians. The perfect place to make a stand. Cashin tapped the pilot through his calm. Drop us here. Then circle wide. If you draw fire, take them toward the western ridge. Copy that. The transport banked hard, and the warriors dropped in silence, landing in sand that swallowed sound like water. Cashin crouched behind a broken altar, surveying the cliffs. They'll be on us fast, he said. We need to look like a full division. Syrah, light the decoys. Jor, set the flares along the ridge. Move! Within minutes, holographic projections flickered to life across the terrain, false signatures of vehicles, troops, and weapons arrays. It wouldn't hold under close inspection, but it would be enough. A distant hum reached them, the low thunder of Confederacy engines. They're coming, Syrah whispered. Cashin's heart pounded, but he kept his voice calm. Then we make them believe we're the prize. As the first enemy dropships broke through the clouds, Cashin slipped the small Kareth braid into the pocket inside his armor. He could almost hear Leora's voice, measured, fearless. He would hold them. Because she needed time. And because a promise forged in dust still burned brighter than fear. The Confederacy dropships descended like hunting birds, black hulls glinting in the moonlight, engines growling low across the canyon. From his perch above the altar site, Cashin could see at least 24 soldiers disembarking, dark-helmeted, armor-clad figures spreading in formation. They bought the bait, Jor whispered from behind a shattered column. Hold until they breach the perimeter, Cashin replied. Then we light them up. Staggered fire. Make it messy. Syrah adjusted her scope. You're too calm for someone about to take on an army. Cashin kept his eyes forward. Spent most of my life imagining this moment. Might as well meet it head on. The Viridians didn't answer, but he could feel their respect settle into the silence. The first enemy unit reached the outer boundary of the canyon. A proximity mine triggered, throwing up sand and fire. Cashin didn't wait. He rose and fired into the confusion. His plasma rifle hummed with a sharp hiss, dropping 2 enemy soldiers before they could regroup. From the cliffs, Syrah's warriors joined in, disciplined and precise. Laser arcs and charged bolts crisscrossed the open area as the Confederacy scrambled to respond, unsure how many they faced. Keep them off balance! Cashin barked over comms. Rotate firing positions every 30 seconds. Explosions echoed through the canyon as the enemy returned fire. A flare ignited nearby, illuminating the false projections of heavy artillery along the ridge. One of the Confederacy commanders took the bait, directing fire away from their actual positions. They're overcommitting, Jor said. They think this is our main force. Good, Cashin replied. Let them. Then the rumble came. A new shadow fell across the canyon as the dreadnought loomed above them, its underbelly glowing with deployment lights. They're dropping the Titan units, Syrah hissed. Cashin's jaw tightened. Then we fall back. Now. Regroup at the extraction point and signal Leora. It's her turn. As the warriors peeled away into the shadows, Cashin remained for a moment longer, watching the massive vessel slowly descend toward the false battlefield. He activated the beacon. Your move, Leora, he whispered. Then he turned and vanished into the rocks, leaving behind only the flare's dying glow and the promise of a counterstrike. Thunder rolled across the desert, not from the sky, but from the war drums of Viridios. In the capital's hidden command chamber, Warden Leora stood in full battle regalia. Her armor, gleaming obsidian etched with silver runes, clung to her like a second skin. Across her back, twin blades shimmered with faint green light, the ceremonial weapons of a warden bound to war. She stared at the tactical display. Cashin's beacon had gone live. The Confederacy had taken the bait. Enemy dreadnought is committing ground forces to the decoy, her strategist reported. We estimate 70% of their strike division is converging on the southern canyon, leaving the north exposed, Leora said calmly. Just as he said they would. Ro frowned. It could be a double bluff. It's not, she replied. I know him. With a nod, she addressed the war table. Prepare the Talon squadrons. We're striking their forward command post at Ridgepoint. Gasps rose from the council. You'll be exposed, someone began. I will be victorious, Leora interrupted, eyes blazing. I will not let Cashin Ryan bleed alone in the sand. Without another word, she turned and led her warriors through the high archway of the chamber, into the loading bay where Viridian drop gliders awaited. The sleek, thin crafts hummed with barely contained energy, their wings folded tightly like birds of prey. She stepped into the lead glider, Syrah already waiting at the controls. Your human lives, Syrah said as the hatch sealed. His diversion worked. Leora's voice was quiet. He always meant to keep his word. The glider lifted into the darkened sky, shadowing the high ridges, following the terrain's natural bends. Lights from the Confederacy command encampment glimmered ahead, makeshift but heavily fortified. The perfect place to cut off the serpent's head. Approaching target, Syrah called out. Leora leaned forward, resting her fingers on the hilt of her blade. Then let's remind them what it means to challenge a warden. The gliders plunged. Below, the enemy was preparing for victory. They never saw the sky split open. The gliders screamed down from the night sky, wings extended like talons cutting through shadow. As they passed the outer sensor ring of the Confederacy command camp, they dropped their stealth fields and opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through guard towers and outer sentry posts in a flash of light and fury. Viridian warriors poured from the gliders before they even touched the ground, blades drawn, voices raised in ancient battle chants. Leora landed like a meteor, her twin swords flashing as she cut through the first two enemy soldiers with elegant brutality. She moved with the grace of wind and the precision of fire, each motion deliberate, each strike final. A high-ranking Confederacy officer emerged from a command tent, barking orders, until Leora was on him. Sweeping one blade low to disarm and the other high to catch the light just before it pressed to his throat. "Call off your units," she hissed in the Confederacy tongue. "Or I send your head back to your masters in a crate of ash." The officer hesitated only a second before spitting blood at her feet. "Do it." She did. Without pausing, she turned back toward her warriors. No mercy. No retreat. Across the encampment, explosions rocked fuel cells and munitions dumps. The Confederacy's frontline relay node, a massive communications pylon embedded in the rock, toppled under concentrated fire from Syrah's team. Leora stood atop the wreckage, her hair loose and wild, armor scorched and gleaming, the light of fire reflecting in her emerald eyes. She activated her calm. "Cassian, their command post is rubble. It's your turn to vanish." His voice came back, strained but steady. "Copy that. We're falling back now. See you at the rendezvous. Stay alive," she added softer. A brief pause. "Wasn't planning to die before I get to say the rest of what I want to tell you." A flicker of something bloomed behind her stern expression. The transmission ended, but the fire inside her had only just begun. She looked east, where the dreadnought now floated like a god of war. "We've wounded the beast," she said to her warriors. "Now let's take its heart." Cassian's boots pounded across scorched rock as he led his unit through a narrow ravine cut into the bones of the desert. Smoke curled from his shoulder. His armor had been clipped by a glancing plasma bolt, but adrenaline kept the pain distant. Behind him, Syrah and the remaining Viridian warriors followed with practiced speed. Their extraction point was less than a kilometer away, nestled within a defunct mining shaft long since repurposed as an emergency fallback. The sky above was boiling now, thick with Confederacy troop carriers and the gleaming dreadnought that had descended like a blade into the planet's heart. It hovered above the southern canyons, unaware its command center had been leveled only minutes ago. They'd struck hard, but they hadn't won. Not yet. "Status?" Cassian asked between breaths. Syrah checked her scanner. "We lost Jor and Vex. Rest are accounted for." Leora's strike burned through their comm hub. "Their fleet's blind. But they're not retreating." "They won't," Cassian said grimly. "Not until the dreadnought falls." A low rumble passed beneath their feet. "Do you hear that?" one of the warriors asked. Cassian crouched, pressing a hand to the ground. "Engines," he said. "It's repositioning. Probably prepping for a surface bombardment. Then we hit it before it fires," Syrah snapped. Cassian's mind raced. "We can't bring that thing down from the outside. Its armor's too thick, even for orbital fire." "Then from the inside?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "The underbelly's a maintenance zone. I saw the schematics. If we can breach that panel and get inside, we can sabotage the reactor core." "Insanity," one of the others muttered. "Victory," Cassian corrected. "We cripple the dreadnought, we break their invasion." Syrah's eyes narrowed with renewed resolve. "Then lead us, Ryan." As the dreadnought began its slow crawl toward the capital, Cassian turned toward it, determination tightening every muscle. He'd trained his whole life for this moment. Not just to fight, but to keep a promise that had become so much more. He reached for the token in his pocket, feeling its weight against his palm. "Hold on, Leora," he thought. "I'm coming for the heart of the storm." The dreadnought loomed like a floating city of iron and fire, its underside bristling with heat vents and armored bulkheads. Cassian and his team crept along a ridge just below its hovering mass, the ground trembling with each slow pulse of its gravitational stabilizers. They had less than an hour before it reached the outer edge of the capital. Once it did, it could begin orbital bombardment, flattening everything, including the command center and the heart of Viridian leadership. Cassian activated his wrist scanner. A schematic flickered into view, faint and distorted from electromagnetic interference. There, he whispered, pointing. That access panel leads into the primary maintenance corridor. If we can reach the vent housing above it, we can drop in unnoticed. Syrah gave a curt nod. I'll take point. You follow. The approach was treacherous. The heat radiating from the dreadnought's belly singed exposed skin, and every few seconds, a blast vent would hiss with scalding steam. One wrong step would mean being flash-cooked in an instant. Still, they climbed. Syrah reached the vent first and pried it open with practiced hands. One by one, the team slid inside, crawling through the narrow shaft, their movements muffled by the constant hum of machinery. The interior of the dreadnought was vast and clinical, white light reflecting off cold metal, automated turrets tracking unseen enemies, and mechanical drones moving with mindless precision. Cassian moved in silence, counting steps, reading symbols and Viridian script etched into the walls. Reactor core access is 5 levels down. He whispered into comms. We split into 2 pairs. Distraction and detonation. I want the bomb, Syrah said immediately. Cassian gave a tight smile. Didn't think you'd ask nicely. They moved like ghosts, dispatching patrols with quiet efficiency. By the time they reached the reactor chamber, alarms had begun to whine, quiet at first, then growing louder. They were running out of time. Cassian dropped to one knee, unpacking the small pulse bomb from his satchel. 2-minute charge. After that, this entire ship becomes dead weight. Syrah clamped it to the base of the reactor and armed the sequence. Done. Cassian turned to the others. Go. I'll stay behind and seal the chamber. We can't risk them disarming it. Syrah opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off. I'm not dying here. I'm just finishing something I started. She stared at him for a beat, then nodded once and vanished into the corridor with the others. Cassian closed the blast doors, locked them, and stood alone with the hum of the bomb and the pulse of the core. He reached up to his comm and keyed a secure channel. Leora, he said, his voice steady. Detonation in 90 seconds. The dreadnought's going down. Her reply came quickly, sharp with urgency. Where are you? Still inside. I'll find a way out before it goes. Silence crackled. You better, she said finally, softer. Cassian smiled faintly. I'm not breaking my promise now. The countdown ticked in his ear. 80 seconds. Cassian raced through the dreadnought's corridors, alarms blaring and red lights flashing across bulkheads. The enemy had realized too late what was happening. Automated lockdowns sealed sections behind him as he sprinted, leaping over steam vents and hurdling low drones that sparked and whined in confusion. 70 seconds. A blast rocked the deck, nearly throwing him off his feet. The core was beginning to destabilize, overloaded by the planted charge. Even before detonation, the cascading failure would tear the ship apart from within. Rhine to extraction. He panted into his comm. I need a route out. Now. Static. Then, Syrah's voice, sharp and commanding. Exit 3 decks up, starboard side. Emergency hatch. We've got a glider on final approach. He didn't ask how she'd managed it. He just ran. 40 seconds. His body screamed as he climbed a ladder shaft slick with coolant. His shoulder throbbed where the armor plating had been torn during the earlier firefight, and the heat from the collapsing core seared the metal around him. But he didn't slow. 30 seconds. He reached the hatch, a circular port rimmed with blinking hazard lights. He slammed his palm to the panel. Red. Manual override. He growled. He pulled out his knife and tore the cover away from the control unit, fingers scrambling to reconnect wires. He'd studied Viridian tech. He knew this. 20 seconds. The door opened. Wind and dust tore at him as the hatch yawned over open air. Far below, the canyons glowed red with fire and battle. A shape approached, sleek and dark, with glowing wings like a bird of myth. Leora's personal glider. It banked sharply and came in low, side hatch opening with a hiss. Inside, she stood gripping a stabilizer rail, her arm extended. Jump! She shouted. 10 seconds. Cashin didn't think. He leapt into the void. Wind roared in his ears. The ground blurred beneath him. Then impact. Leora's hand caught his forearm. Their eyes locked for a single heartbeat before Sarah yanked him the rest of the way in. The hatch slammed shut behind him. 3 seconds. The glider pulled into a steep ascent. And then, behind them, the dreadnought erupted. A pillar of fire pierced the clouds. Shattered hull plating rained from the sky like meteors, and the shockwave lit up the night for hundreds of miles. The Viridian dreadnought, the Confederacy's hammer, was gone. Inside the glider, Cashin lay panting on the floor, smoke curling from his armor. Leora knelt beside him, gripping his face, searching his eyes. "You made it," she whispered, voice tight. "Course I did," he said with a weak grin. "Still had things I needed to say." Her eyes glistened, her voice low. "Then say them." He reached for the token still tied to his wrist, the Kareth cord, somehow untouched through all the fire and chaos. "I love you, Leora," he said. "And I have for a long time." She leaned down, forehead touching his. "Then know this, in Viridian tradition, when a warrior survives a fire meant to kill him, he is no longer just a soldier." "What is he?" Cashin whispered. "A life bond." And then she kissed him. Amid the falling stars, surrounded by fire and sky, Cashin Rhine's promise, made in the dust of childhood, became something eternal. The war ended not with a final battle, but with silence. After the destruction of the Confederacy dreadnought, their forces scattered. Ships recalled, commanders withdrew, and a ceasefire was signed within days. Viridios stood unconquered. Not because of overwhelming firepower, but because two warriors, one born of stars, the other of stone, had refused to let the world fall. In the weeks that followed, reconstruction began across the capital. Dust settled. Wounds were dressed. Tributes were raised to the fallen, and legends began to take shape. Cashin Rhine became more than a soldier in the eyes of the Viridian people. He was Starblood, the human who had crossed the galaxy to keep a vow made with a child's heart and a warrior's soul. And Leora, she remained warden, yes, but now, her authority carried something more than duty. It carried hope. Cashin sat beneath a sunshade atop the temple ridge, overlooking the wide sprawl of the city he had once seen only from space. The breeze was warm, fragrant with sandflowers blooming after the rain. His uniform jacket lay folded beside him, and across his chest, still raw but healing, was a new mark. A Viridian scarbrand, given only to those who had faced death beside their bonded. "You shouldn't be up here alone," came Leora's voice behind him. He smiled without turning. "I'm not alone. I was waiting for you." She stepped beside him, her hair loose in the wind, her armor replaced by a light robe in green and gold. She looked younger without the weight of war on her shoulders, and older, in a way, marked by everything she'd endured. They stood in silence for a while, looking out over the rooftops and towers. "The Assembly wants to make us a symbol," Leora said eventually. "A beacon of unity. A celebration of interspecies diplomacy." Cashin glanced at her. "Are we?" "Not to me," she replied. "To me, you're still the boy with 2 big boots and a plastic toy ship." He chuckled. "And you're still the girl who called me tiny human and walked away like a queen." She arched a brow. "I was a queen. You just didn't know it yet." He turned toward her, eyes serious now. "We survived the war. But what about the rest of it? The politics, the expectations? Do we survive that too?" She didn't answer at first. Then she took his hand and lifted it, placing it over her heart. He could feel the steady rhythm there, strong and sure. "I'm not afraid of what comes next," she said. "Not if it's with you." Cashin looked down at their joined hands. His thumb brushed the faint outline of the Kareth cord still tied around his wrist. "Then let's make a new promise," he said. "Not just to stay, but to build something better. Together." Leora nodded once. "I vow it," she said. And on a planet where the stars burned twin and bright above the horizon, two warriors, born from different worlds, chose to walk one path forward, bound by promises no longer rooted in childhood dreams, but in the fire of what they'd become. The ceremony took place atop the skyplate, a vast, windswept platform carved from a single slab of ancient stone. It overlooked the high cliffs of Viridios, where the twin suns dipped low into a glowing crimson dusk. From every terrace and bridge of the capital, thousands gathered. Viridians and humans alike, dressed in the ceremonial colors of their respective cultures, burnished gold, rich earth, and brilliant blues. Cassian stood at the center of the skyplate, flanked by members of both the Galactic Assembly and the Viridian Council. His uniform had been modified, blending human military design with flowing Viridian fabric. Across his chest gleamed a new sigil, 2 stars interlocked by a single line, one silver, one emerald. He had never looked more out of place, and more at home. When Leora appeared from the high archway behind him, a hush fell over the entire gathering. She wore ceremonial battle robes in white and silver, embroidered with her family's crest, the crest that had once been etched on the token she'd given him so many years ago. Her hair was braided in the traditional life-bond style, ornaments of both earth metal and Viridian crystal woven into the strands. Cassian could hardly breathe. She stopped before him, her eyes glowing with warmth and certainty. "You came for me once," she said. "Now you stand with me." "And I always will," he replied. "Across every storm." A priest of Viridian tradition stepped forward, holding the ceremonial binding cord, a length of braided fabric made from materials drawn from both worlds. As Cassian and Leora extended their hands, the cord was wrapped around their wrists, binding them together. "In the presence of stars and stone," the priest intoned, "do you vow to walk forward as one? To lead, protect, and grow, together?" "I vow," Leora said without hesitation. Cassian smiled. "With all I am I vow." They turned to each other and extended their free hands. In Viridian culture, this gesture was not simply symbolic. It was the beginning of a soul bond, forged by touch, completed by shared breath. Their fingers touched. Their foreheads met. And above them, a pulse of light spread across the sky as the twin suns dipped below the horizon. 2 stars, aligned at last. From the gathered crowd rose a sound that transcended language. Not applause, not cheers, but a harmonic chant of unity, a blend of Viridian melody and earth rhythm that had never been sung before, but would be remembered for generations. Cassian closed his eyes. He had crossed worlds. He had fought through flame. He had kept his promise. 5 years later, Viridios was no longer just a name in forgotten assembly archives. It had become a nexus of unity, a place where treaties were born not of desperation, but of hope. The Joint Command Citadel, built into the cliffs overlooking the skyplate, stood as a testament to what once seemed impossible. Inside its walls, humans and Viridians worked side by side. Scientists sharing data, engineers blending technology, warriors training in combined disciplines. What had begun as survival had become foundation. Cassian stood atop the observation terrace, overlooking the valley where crops now grew where war had once scorched the ground. He wore a looser version of his old uniform, less formal, more lived in. The silver and emerald sigil still rested over his heart. Footsteps approached behind him. He didn't need to turn to know who they belonged to. "Thought I'd find you up here," Leora said, stepping beside him. Her robe fluttered in the breeze, her hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. Cassian's smile widened. "I like the quiet. You're going to lose that luxury soon," she said dryly, placing his hand on her stomach. "In a few months, you'll be up all night walking halls with a half-Viridian who refuses to sleep." He chuckled. "So, just like their mother." Leora's eyes sparkled, but her voice grew softer. "Do you ever think about that first day? When I almost knocked you over and told you to watch where you were going? I think about it every day," he said. "That was the moment everything started. The moment I realized there was someone I wanted to protect, long before I understood why." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun crest the ridge. The first rays bathed the city in golden light, and somewhere down below, bells began to ring. Trade ships arriving. Children laughing on their way to lessons. A world healing. A world growing. Cassian turned to her. Do you ever regret any of it? Leora shook her head. Not the war. Not the wounds. Not the wait. Because it all led here. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. So, what now? He asked. She leaned her head against him. Now we raise our child. We teach them why peace is worth fighting for. And someday, when they ask why the stars look different over Viridios than they do anywhere else, we'll tell them it's because two people made a promise. Cassian finished. And they kept it. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly, two suns rising in tandem. And below them, a future unfolded, carved not by destiny, but by love, sacrifice, and a vow that had crossed galaxies to become something eternal.